to present the steel standards principles and the related activities. Um, Thank you for joining us. Devin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here and for that kind introduction. Good afternoon to everybody. I would like to just take a few minutes now to share with you an update on the steel standards principles work. This group was briefed on the standards principles, I believe, last year, right, Rainer? I believe we had a presentation at that time. We had an earlier presentation on the genesis of this work, let's say. This is an opportunity to provide an update on that and also to complement some of the information that's also been provided to other WTO bodies, including the Committee on Trade and Environment and the Technical Barriers to Trade Committee. As you may be aware, just to give a little bit of background on this, these efforts, in 2022, we had some initial discussions at the senior level in the WTO with the steel industry in particular, and discussing some of the challenges they were facing around decarbonization measures, and especially the methodologies for measuring embodied carbon in steel products and production processes. Following those consultations, we held the Trade Forum for Decarbonization Standards in March 2023, and that was also supported with some publications from our side, where we brought together a number of steel industry stakeholders to explain some of the challenges that they faced around, for example, lack of transparency, growing fragmentation of a range of competing standards and methodologies for measuring emissions in this sector, and how that was impacting both trade and investment into decarbonization efforts and the resulting uncertainty for business. As a result, and following from this work at the Trade Forum in March 2023, a collaborative effort was launched with a number of different stakeholders, including international organizations, industry associations, and standard setting bodies as well, to work on some principles that could help to guide better and help to reduce this fragmentation in this important area. The WTO Secretariat was involved in this effort because of the fact that, of course, trade is there, and the TBT principles, in terms of both those that are embodied in the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement and the 6 principles for international standards, were both being referenced in that work. So we thought it was important to reflect well those principles in this effort. At COP28 last year, the principles were launched, and we now have 46 different organizations that have endorsed the principles, which include private companies across the steel value chain, international organizations, industry associations, standards bodies, and also civil society as well. So on this slide, you see the organizations that have endorsed this effort, which represent different parts of the steel sector. You can find the steel standards principles on the WTO website, but I just thought I'd show on the screen here the sort of key operational page of the principles. It's quite short. There's not a lot of detail there, but I think some of the key elements to highlight is that these principles are recognizing the importance of more dialogue, the need for actually more dialogue across all different stakeholder groups and developed and developing countries, to discuss this issue around how to make sure that this type of effort in terms of how we measure the emissions in this sector, how the standards are being developed, is done so in a way which is transparent, that the result is interoperable, etc. So there's indeed a core objective of this work, of these principles, is to promote more interoperability, mutual recognition, and alignment or building upon international standards. And of course, this is also linked to a very important aspect of greater data reporting and more transparency to allow for global tracking of emissions. There's also a mention of the importance of performance-based approaches, given that, as you're probably well aware, there are various production routes and methods and technologies in the steel sector. In addition, the principles reference both the TBT agreement principles, as well as the IEA net zero principles for emissions measurement and data collection in the steel sector. So they draw on this existing work. Another part of this effort also is to talk about definitions for near zero steel, which are emerging in different places. So in terms of what's been happening since COP, the organizations that you saw on the slide before started to initiate, a group of organizations initiated technical discussions earlier this year in April and May, looking at some of the specific issues. A lot of this work is being based on efforts of the World Steel Association, which is known as World Steel for short. And World Steel is undertaking a comprehensive mapping exercise. So they've been engaging with, and they have identified more than 80 different standards, methodologies, and initiatives in this space. And they're engaging with a group of those to gather information and to then assess in a more sort of evidence-based way what are the similarities and differences between the different approaches. So these can be things like how the boundaries are set up in the system, how they deal with data reporting, emissions factors, co-products, et cetera. So there's many different aspects to that work. But so the World Steel Association is really leading the technical work in this area. Last week, we had the first in-person meeting of the endorsing organizations at the end of last week, where some discussions were initiated on how can we basically bring forward the principles. We don't want it to be just a piece of paper, but we hope that further work can be done. And so the WTO Secretariat is supporting these efforts in our role as a convener, but very much building on the technical expertise of World Steel and, of course, all the industry players that you see that you saw in the previous slides. So another in-person meeting is planned for September, and the aim is to try to come back with some steps forward, some tangible steps forward by COP29. So we've marked that as a possible milestone in this work, and yet to be seen the form that those will take, but certainly the mapping work of World Steel will form a key part of those efforts and the possible deliverables for this year. So that brings me to the end of the presentation, and very much welcome any thoughts or comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Devin, for updating.